And so now all these different systems are trying to figure out, how do I respond to this change or to this stimulus? While that's happening, the person living inside the body is undergoing the stress response, which of course has different hormone levels or balance than the relaxation response. And so the way that that is being lived is going to have an influence on the outcome or the unfolding of. So to keep it concise then, there's the body, the person living in the body. The body's undergoing the stress response, and because of this container-content relationship, so is the person undergoing the stress response. Now, if the person is stressing out of, how will this affect my life? How is this going to unfold? Will I lose my job? Will I be able to do my favorite activities? And so on. That in itself is going to affect the hormonal balance, or what we call it, the hormone, in French we call it le soupeuse hormone, the hormonal soup. What's floating in that soup right now of hormones. And that itself is going to, again, influence the stress response. So 2 different examples. If I feel stressed about it, then it's going to have more stimulus in the stress response. If I understand how to welcome it and adapt along with it, adapt and evolve along with it, then it's going to have a different response, a different outcome in the stress response.
Welcome to the Mindful Injury Recovery Talks with Dr. Maya Novak. Your host is a mindful healing expert and the author of the book, Heal Beyond Expectations, and this show is here to give you the extra resources you need when healing from any physical trauma. Tune in to today's episode to get inspired and empowered. And before we start, here's a little known fact about Dr. Maya. She's an animal lover, but she really doesn't like mealybugs and similar creatures that find their way to her plants and usually overstay their visit.
I've been connected to yoga for about 2 decades. And there's one thing that my first yoga teacher taught me that connects to yoga itself as well as life in general. And that is, whenever you lose balance, this very next moment, you got another opportunity to try again. This is yoga, and this is life. And this interview will be dedicated to all of this and way much more. Today, I'm joined by Karina Reisman. She's the founder of Resource Yoga Therapy, where she combines her background in the health sciences with yoga philosophy. She helps people regain their health and balance using yoga as a therapeutic tool and as a complementary technique in healing. With over 20 years of experience, passion, and curiosity, she's sharing the essentials of health and how to make it accessible, efficient, and sustainable. Karina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on your podcast and to share tips on health and healing.
Oh, the honor is all mine. And, I love starting these conversations, these talks with a bit of curiosity on my end, because I know that listeners are curious as well. So can you share a bit about your story, your background? How did you get into your expertise? And how did you get into yoga therapy?
I think since I've been a little girl and they asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was always saying a doctor. And so I studied through all my academics was all related to the health sciences. And essentially my main intention was to go to med school, which I started the procedure when I went to university. My bachelor's was in microbiology and immunology. And that's the prerequisite to the med school program. It's you have to do a bachelor's to get a master's here in Montreal. And so I did my entire studies in that and fascinated about the human body and its potential. And partway through med school or pre-med school, I remember wondering, where are these answers to the questions? I went in with the questions essentially being, what are the optimal conditions to reestablish and to maintain health? And, thinking med school would give me some of those answers. And very interestingly, we learn a lot, of course, about human physiology And science, one of the approaches of science is to separate, divide, and measure. That's a scientific approach, which has a lot of benefit. It's just that it forgets to bring it back together. And so at the same time, I was doing a lot of yoga, which is all about bringing things together, the union or the communion of things. And I realized a lot of the answers I was looking for in med school, I was finding on the mat and in the yoga philosophy. And so bit by bit, I can give the whole story. This essentially, I remember at one moment, I realized that med school maybe wasn't the right path for me. And so I went home and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a yoga teacher. It took a while for them to swallow that one. I think they just saw how enriching it is, not only for me, and then how I started to teach it and guide it for other people. And I'm really happy that I have the scientific background to understand the physiologic, anatomic, and even the energetic effects, because we can understand energy through mechanical physics also. And so to understand it through that lens as well, and to bring the practices together. And this is my approach now, is to understand what is happening inside of us while we're doing these practices and how to practice them in function to extract the most benefit from them.
Yes. Well, the foundation, having a foundation is really important, right? So that what you said, so that we understand how the body works, what are the, anatomy, physiology, and so on. But healing, as we spoke also last week when we chatted, we both align and agree that it's way more than just physical and zooming in. There are so many things that we need to cover, even when we are healing the physical body. So we are way more. And I am not surprised that what you said, that you found a lot of answers on the mat through your own practice as well, right? The experience of discovering who you were, but also extra more. I mean, I don't want to put any words into your mouth, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think to pick up where you started the conversation, the comment is that health is multifactorial. So going beyond the physical is essential, and moving from the physical to beyond the physical is a really good approach, because everything that we experience is from within our body, regardless if we experience pain or not. Right now, I'm sitting here talking to you because I have a physical body and my mouth is operating, right? So any action that I do, whether it's a daily activity and or an emotion that I feel, it moves through the body. Now, is it limited to the body? That's where we can open up and see, I think, where our approaches are very complementary, is understanding, like I said earlier, the multifactorial. And so one way that I like to explain it when I'm doing the trainings is there's a body, there's a person living within that body, and there's a person living in their day-to-day. And so if we just look right now, you and I have very similar biological structures. We can open an anatomy book and say, oh yes, I have a rotator cuff too. Oh yes, I have two kidneys underneath the diaphragm. And we can look at a lot of the similarities in the physical structure. And in that way, I call it the hardware. And then there's the software. There's the person living inside that body that navigates what the body does and then creates a relationship with the body, what the body does and what the person does in that body and how they affect each other. And then what happens in the day-to-day will have the cumulative effect. Habits are from frequency and duration. And when we go into the pain conversation, we can see that pain can be classified as a conditioned response. So a conditioned response is analogous to a habit. So things that we do the most often and for the longest period of time. And so our day-to-day has a huge influence on the evolution of any sensation or any experience, whether it's pain or a simple emotional response and or mechanical habits of how I walk and how I sit and how I breathe, for example.
Yes, absolutely. Day to day, I so agree. And where you also started this software, right? Hardware we have two legs, two arms. I mean, okay, we are talking here about injury recovery. So perhaps someone lost their leg or their arm. But, in general, we have that hardware, the software day to day, but also the experiences that we had in our lives. So that's why it's so fascinating in a way to see that we can have two different people with the same injury, and one is going to be healing very well and the other one is going to be struggling. And I think that's connected to that software and those experiences. So it's impossible, I mean, in theory or on a piece of paper or in a study medical journal, it's so easy to see, oh, it's just number one and number two and number three, and everybody should be healing the same. But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I did my final research paper pre-thesis on the placebo effect and the power of belief, of course. And why I just thought of that now is because one of the main figures in immunology is Candace Pert, and she talks about the biology of disease versus the experience of the illness. And that, I think, is exactly what you're saying, is that in the medical approach, often it'll be, oh, if you have anxiety, we'll just give you this prescription. Anxiety equals this prescription. Whereas in a lot of the other approaches, the more holistic and complementary approaches, is to see, well, how is this person experiencing the diagnosis? How is this person experiencing this emotion or sensation? And how can we allow this person as a whole to move through it and evolve in a way that feels in line with how they want to evolve with it sustainably.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, one thing that we briefly chatted about before as well is, for example, since you mentioned this anxiety and how the person responds to everything, because when we are talking about injury recovery or any physical trauma, I'm sure that you have clients and people who reach out who are scared of either losing job or they lost job because of this injury, this pain. So it's not just the physical aspect of, oh, I have pain in my leg or in my back or something else, but this everything affects the whole life of that person.
Exactly. It goes back to what we were saying about there's the body, the person living in that body, and the person living in that day to day. So if we can, for example, say there's pain in the lower back, we can call that the body. And then there's a person experiencing that pain. And how do they experience that pain? Do they welcome it? Do they fear it? Do they repress it? How do they address the pain? And then there's very often, the fear of what happens if this pain doesn't go away? How will this pain affect my life? And often that fear has a huge influence on the healing effect. And we can extrapolate on that a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Please, can we go a bit deeper into this? Because I am sure that this insight is so important to so many listeners. So please.
Of course. I think the simplest way to address it, kind of like with an umbrella statement, is often we stress about the stress. And so we just add more stress to an already stressful situation. Or when I teach it sometimes is that, if the soup is too salty, and we add more salt. It's a very similar phenomenon, just to keep it easy to understand. And so what we do know is that the body's collective response, its main function is survival through adaptation. This is the main function of the nervous system, survival through adaptation. And so when there's a stressor or a stimulus that will affect the body's balance, there's a response to adapt to this new stressor. So if we'll keep the lower back example, then the body, the lower back's one of the main functions is transfer the weight to the feet. It's the center of gravity and so on. And so while the body is trying to figure out now how to adapt to the fact that the center of gravity can't do its function, the stress response is being activated. And the stress response, as we understand, affects the muscular and the mental and all the physiologic functions because it's a collective response. Everyone has to figure out a new way to do it. Yeah. As a side note, which will feed into this question, is that I often teach the relationship between anatomy and physiology, or the person living in the body, as container and contents. And so, if I can imagine a bag of water or a balloon full of water, if I affect the shape of the balloon, the water inside will move along with it. And same thing, if I add more water, the shape of the balloon will change, right? So if I add more water, that's something like inflammation. It affects the shape of the physical container and vice versa. And so, without going into too much detail, just to keep it kind of common knowledge, the in the lower back region, if we keep this example, it's a crossroads or an intersection of a lot of different systems communicating. Through there, you have not only the digestive, you have the reproductive, you have the urinary, you have all these different kind of cross-firing of neurons in between the two main diaphragms. And that's, if we understand that the diaphragms are meant for breathing, that's the number one response for survival. And so now all these different systems are trying to figure out, how do I respond to this change or to this stimulus? While that's happening, the person living inside the body is undergoing the stress response, which of course has different hormone levels or balance than the relaxation response. And so the way that that is being lived is going to have an influence on the outcome or the unfolding of. So to keep it concise then, there's the body, the person living in the body. The body's undergoing the stress response, and because of this container content relationship, so is the person undergoing the stress response. Now, if the person is stressing out of, how will this affect my life? How is this going to unfold? Will I lose my job? Will I be able to do my favorite activities? And so on. That in itself is going to affect the hormonal balance, or what we call it, the hormone, in French we call it le soupes hormone, the hormonal soup. What's floating in that soup right now of hormones. And that itself is going to, again, influence the stress response. So, two different examples. If I feel stressed about it, then it's going to have more stimulus in the stress response. If I understand how to welcome it and adapt along with it, adapt and evolve along with it, then it's going to have a different response, a different outcome in the stress response.
Yes, absolutely. So I am not surprised that potentially a lot of your work focuses also on stress management. Am I correct?
Indeed, yes, that's one of my specialties. And especially because, regardless of the nature of the visit, someone's going to come to see me for a specific reason, and we can keep pain as our central example. There's a change happening in their life, and even as healing starts to reestablish, that is an ongoing and continuous change. Change is adaptation. And in physiology, by the way, stress is defined as the failure to adapt. And so the more that we can allow the person to adapt and evolve continuously, the less it's a stress on the system. Now, what tends to happen, the person living in the body is thinking, oh, well, what if this and what if that? And it stays more focused on the known or the familiar for obvious reasons. And then, because can't imagine or doesn't want to imagine a different version of a reality, that will influence the rhythm and the rate of adaptation, which in turn will be a stress, and then will cause a vicious cycle.
Oh, yes.
So the more we can accompany the changes along the way, the more sustainable the healing process is. Not to say that we can't return to our favorite life and lifestyle. It's just that we might have to take a little detour and a little of a learning process along the way, which might make the familiar just new and improved when we go back to it.
Oh, yes. this so resonates with me because we've heard so many times the only constant in life is change, and we kind of understand it or know about it. But from my own personal experience, sometimes I just don't want to have that change, because it's like, why again? It's almost like constantly we have to adapt, evolve, change. And sometimes you just want to be like, oh please, just give me some rest. I don't want to change today, I don't want to change this week. But in what you just said, it's about adapting to that change that actually affects the stress levels, and this in return, in a positive return, really help the physical body, right?
Course. Well, essentially, we're always evolving, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. Everything in nature is evolving. Every human organism, every living organism is always evolving. Now, do we evolve for the better and better, or do we get worse and worse, so to speak? Do we get better with age or not? Right? And so we can think of each new cycle of change could be a limiting cycle or a liberating cycle. And that in itself is within a certain sense of our own power. We have choices we can make and actions we can do that can influence that we get more and more free within our body, within ourselves as time evolves. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe even just to make it less daunting for any of our listeners, it's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean, from one day to the next I have to remake a whole life. It's very gradual, the change. That's why most of us don't notice it, and we think it's the same thing day to day. And as we say, time changes everything unless we inhibit it. And so if we get stuck in our own patterns, then it'll make the change again less of a fluid transition and more of a jump from one state to the other.
Thank you for saying that, because sometimes we really think in black and white, either 100% or zero, and we forget that this is a spectrum of everything. And one thing that resonates with me, and I started looking at change and life and growth, like in general, is like breathing. Sometimes when you breathe in, you expand, you go more outside, and then there are times when you need to exhale as well, and you go more inside. So it's like going in and out and in and out. And for me, it really, I don't know, it takes away that pressure of I have to be inhaling all the time. Like, you cannot. I mean, life doesn't work that way, right?
If you were to inhale all the time, you probably wouldn't last as long. um,
Exactly.
and just on that point, going back to the stress response is activated by the inhale, and the relaxation response is activated by the exhale. And you can't have one without the other. We can't have the inhale without the exhale. And if you go back to what you just finished saying, inhale is like taking in, taking in, taking in. And we have continuous stimulus without the time to process it and digest it. And so if we think of the analogy of an all-you-can-eat salad bar or all-you-can-eat food bar, it could be the best food, all local, organic, and made with love, and so on. And if I just eat, 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 eat nonstop, then even the best food won't get processed, digested, and assimilated, and it might cause more indigestion than the energy I need. Which reminds me, because at the beginning of the talk, you said your first yoga teacher, and right away I thought of one of my first yoga teachers, Dr. Bali, who said, it's not what the food does to your body, it's what your body does to the food. And the more I contemplate that and the more I teach it, the more I realize it applies to everything. So it's not what the experience does to the body, it's what the body does to the experience. And then that goes back into the subjective experience of pain, for example, or any emotion, any event that might have an impact on us. It's partly the multifactorial impact, and it's partly my choice of what I do with it. And in that way, it's very empowering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I mentioned that, and you talked about how you got into yoga therapy. is there a difference if we go a bit into this aspect? Is there a difference between, let's call it regular yoga and then therapy yoga, or is just a fancy name for yoga? Or, I don't want to be disrespectful, please don't get me wrong, but there are so many in the last couple of decades, so many different yogas popped out. So I think it's a good question to know what is really the difference between regular yoga and therapy yoga.
Yeah, I'm very happy you asked this question, actually. So, yoga in and of itself is therapeutic, regardless of the type of yoga that we do. What we want to consider then, it's not what we do, it's how we do it and what's happening inside while we're doing it. So I'll give an example outside of the yoga practice. Some people have sciatica, and when they walk, it aggravates it. And other people, when they walk, it relieves it. So it's not walking that's good or bad for sciatica. It's what's happening inside the body when they're walking. Same thing with bursitis in the shoulder. Some people swim. It's the best cure forever. And some people can't swim anymore because of their bursitis. So I can apply then to the yoga. It's not so much is downward dog therapeutic. It's how are we doing it and what's happening inside while we're doing it. So again, container contents and a whole list of factors that we can list. I started off teaching group classes. And as I was teaching, I realized that, there's 20 people in front of me, and a lot of people aren't practicing in the way that feels aligned and safe. It feels like the postures are too advanced for them. And so they're not extracting the benefits inherent and potential in the practice that they're doing. And so I was wondering, are they walking out with more tension than they arrived? And are they walking out with more compensation or just more habit? They're doing the way you do everything is the way you do anything. And so did they walk out with just as much tension as they walked in? Some people say, oh, I started yoga goal-oriented and performing, in wanting to perform, and I was doing my yoga that way until I realized that I was just bringing the office onto the mat. And so these realizations make the big difference. I think the intention, the attitude, the presence, breathing, all these factors are going to affect if this same sequence, we can look at the same sequence and say some people are going to get more stress response and some people are going to get more relaxation response. So that being said, I realize that each person is unique, the hardware and the software, and I don't feel that I can serve my best by teaching a group class, not only the same actions, just the same rhythm, the same instructions. What are they living in this moment? And so now when I do the yoga therapeutics, I extract from the yoga philosophy a lot more than the actual asana practice, because most of the people who come to see me aren't ready to do the asana, so I break them down for somatic awareness, to have a better understanding of their body, and health education. I teach a lot of the people who come to see me understand what's going on so that, again, they feel educated, hence empowered, and can be more proactive in their own healing process. The yoga practice is therapeutic. How can we practice it in a way that extracts the potential benefit for the need of this moment, this person?
Yes. So it's really about mindfulness, right? It's about being mindful what you are doing in that moment. Because what sometimes I can see, I've had experience with many different yoga teachers. Some resonate with me, some they don't resonate with me. I mean, thank goodness I don't resonate with everybody either, and I don't want to. And you as well, right? So, but what I'm seeing sometimes that is happening with yoga is that we are treating it, especially Western culture, as training or acrobatics or something to make it look good. But at the same time, we are not actually aware what is happening within ourselves. So I think that it's a lot about this mindfulness, and mindfulness also then bring the stress response down. Am I understanding this correctly, or am I seeing this?
That's essentially, yes, mindfulness, and then knowing what to do with what you find. And this is why I really like to provide the education portion. So if I find that my breath is shallow, or my knee has tension or something like this, then how do I address it accordingly? And
Mm-hmm.
so knowing is half the battle, and the other half is all of the mindfulness and all the meditative qualities that we can cultivate from really listening in and fine tuning and feeling the breath and observing what is, being with what is, and so on.
So, since you mentioned this tension in the knee as an example, is this addressing it only in regards to what are you doing in that pose and how to help the body not to feel the tension, or is actually going beyond that and is also what the knee might be saying, that it's not potentially just physical, but it might be something else?
Yeah, it's a big question.
It
Uh,
is.
the most sincere answer, I think, is that it's case by case.
Yes.
Again, what we were saying earlier, it's not, copy paste from one person to the next. What we do want to understand is the body's collective response on all levels. And so in the physical body, there's a principle called tensegrity, which is essentially that if you change anything, you change everything. So if I pull on my t-shirt, and you can do this with me now, if I pull on my sweater right now, anywhere I pull, the whole sweater knows about it. And so if this was one big bodysuit, then I pull anywhere and the whole body responds. So sometimes when we feel the effect in the knee is the result of another area. And it's often either the neighboring joint or the other opposite end of the body. So the idea is to realign the whole body on a physical level, and then understanding this container contents that inside my body, before I talked about this bag of water, we are, mostly water. And that water travels through the different systems of the body, whether it's circulatory or lymphatic and so on. And so I'm moving all these circuits in my body. When I'm changing the physical structure, I'm changing how the systems communicate and connect, which then changes their signals and what that's happening. And the person living in there is also experiencing all these changes at any time. We can go in many directions to answer this question. Is the pain only in this pose, and is the pain only in the knee? We look at the ensemble, the collective response, and evolve accordingly, address it accordingly. That being said, it could simply be that, the knee is not aligned over the ankle, and
Yeah.
it's that simple. And at the same time, it could be, a phenomenon related to what I just mentioned.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree that it's case by case. And sometimes it really is as simple as, you know what, maybe you have to move that knee for 1 centimeter, in the other direction, and then the knee is going to be happy. So if in that moment we start thinking and really, going to philosophy, but what is saying, what kind of emotional stuff I have to resolve, it might not be very beneficial.
There's the two extremes of one would be repressing it, and the other one is overthinking it.
Yes, absolutely. The only problem that I'm seeing in general with our culture is because the way how we were raised, that when something happens physically with us, we have to go to the doctor, and sometimes absolutely it is necessary, absolutely, but we all the time we first think about, yes, it must be something physical, and then we are so focused on the physical that it's so easy to forget about other aspects as well. I don't know if you are finding this in your practice as well or not.
Indeed, yes. I think it's just the way that we've understood how to address health and problems related to health, or scenarios related to health. It's, again, neither good nor bad. It's one approach. And my personal favorite is something called integrative medicine or functional medicine, where we understand that yoga is so amazing for healing and it has its limitations. Acupuncture, amazing for healing and it has its limitations. And naturopathy and conventional medicine and the long list of therapeutic approaches, they're all so rich and they're all limited. And so, how can we complement each other? And how can I say, well, if I have a team of therapists that all have their specialty and all understand one of the slices of the pie, for example, of all these aspects or all these factors of the person, then in that way we can address the multifactorial collective response to health. Good or bad to go see this person, that's not the way to approach the question. It's more understanding, of course, go, and at the same time, look beyond. And I would say that even for someone who comes to see me, there's always beyond because the human mind is limited in knowledge. So there's always beyond what we know. And I think even as we evolve with the scientific research, we're finding things that we didn't know just 5, 10 years ago. Or when I was at McGill, we had little microscopes that weren't laser at the time, and so we didn't know half the things that were out there. Even though they were out there, we just couldn't measure them. So keeping that in mind always is one, staying open to possibilities, which is wonderful for the adaptive response. It's the opposite of I've tried everything and nothing works. So just staying open to the possibilities and also seeing different points of view and getting the benefits of different approaches, in my opinion, is so enriching and so in line with the support that we want to have during healing.
Yes. Well, I love that you mentioned a team because it really is, a team effort to heal someone's body. It's not just having that one, oh, now I have one person, either that is my surgeon or physiotherapist, and they have to have all the answers for me. So it's really about having different people in your team that can help you heal on different levels, because during this whole conversation we are covering that it's not just the physical and what you said, yes, and be curious beyond, yes, and go beyond, yes, and explore more. So it's that I really love that yes and beyond, because it really it's expansion, and it gives sort of how I feel when you were explaining that, was in a way, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm deciding for this, and then I'm curious for something else. Because sometimes what can happen is that you almost feel like a naughty child, like, no, you shouldn't be doing this, and then we are at the stress response again.
Right, exactly. And I like that you said the yes and, because, yoga is union. So often we'll replace or with and. So it's not this or this, it's this and this, and seeing how it interrelates. And in that same line of thought is when I was looking through the placebo research, they did a lot of studies on animals in isolation and animals in group, and how animals in isolation don't heal from pain and overcome anxiety as much as those who are in group. And so understanding the importance of a community and a support team, and feeling that something that happens with the vagus nerve and the healing and all the endogenous opioids and all that are signaled from that, is a definite ingredient in this overall recipe for healing.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that now we are in these times when we are actually really realizing that let's leave the individuality besides or in the past, and it's not just about one person, but it's how can I be surrounded by the best people that can lift me up and help me, and how can I help them as well. And I have to share just quickly one thing. This morning I read a message from one of the people in my community. They reached out as a response on one of my podcast episodes, and she shared things about her and her healing journey, and she asked me some questions. But what helped me in that way is that in that moment when I was reading her message, it gave something to me. I realized some of the things in regards to me. So it was such a beautiful, I don't know, like a dance in regards to, she was asking for help, but I was receiving help from her as well. So I don't know, it's just beautiful how community and support can heal us. We can heal each other.
Indeed. One of my favorite words is symbiosis, and how what helps me grow helps you grow. And I often make this analogy between community and ecosystem, and how if we're in the right ecosystem, then it's fertile for our growth, for our nourishment, and we can have our own fruits and flowers. And sometimes it'll be the same person or the same idea or project that's just not in its right ecosystem. So it could be the same seed, just in a different ecosystem, and it won't flourish. And it's not because the seed is bad or imbalanced, it's just because it's not well surrounded by what it needs to grow. And I think that is fundamental. Even if we look at the World Health Organization, their definition is mental, physical, social as the three pillars of health. And so we often overcome the social aspect.
Yes.
And
Well,
social doesn't mean I have to go out and be on my phone in front of other people. Social just means how do I interrelate with people.
yes, absolutely. It's not social media and let me do one more selfie for, my Instagram or Facebook or whatever, people wherever they spend time. But it's really that connection and community. And I'm not sure if you are familiar, probably you are, with the blue zones, and how it affects different things, how they affect longevity. So yes, there is I think blue zones, 7 of them. It's a book there, exists the blue zones. But one of the things that they also look into is this community, how important it is, and Japan, and how people are connected, and how also young people are taking care of older, and how older people are surrounded with like-minded people. It's about health, but so much more, because it's also about longevity. And when we are healing the physical body, we need that. It's not just that we can do things in isolation. And thank you for sharing that example of animals in isolation and in community.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, can we do a bit of a hands on work so that we take this theory that we talked about into practice, and we discussed what we could do? You offered like a meditation, but before we do the meditation, can we talk a bit more about last time we spoke? You were talking about glasses, different kind of glasses that we are putting on and off. Can you explain a bit about this?
Yes. So a bit of background is that one thing that really helps to know is that the experience of pain is independent of tissue damage. So the amount of pain we feel is not a correlation to the damage of the tissue. And some examples are, a paper cut sometimes hurts more than dropping a can onto your foot or something like this. So the reason I bring this up is because our perspective, or our state of mind or state of being at the time of the stimulus is the key. If I'm having a bad day and I'm already frustrated and I'm annoyed and I just bash my elbow in the wall, then I'm going to have a different reaction than if I just, I'm having a great conversation and I'm laughing about it and all of a sudden I bash my elbow in the wall. could be the same impact, the exact same force, the exact same location, and it'll be not only perceived differently, it'll be processed through the body differently. And these are the pain hormones that we were mentioning together last time we were talking. And so what affects, sometimes they oversimplify, they call it the pain hormones and the happy hormones. And there's a lot of overlap between them because the pain and pleasure centers are in the same part of the brain. And a lot of the time, similar hormones are going to be released for different reasons. So that being said, this can apply to anyone, including myself, regardless of the subject of pain or not. So I like to teach it this way in my training. So let's say all of a sudden I decide to put on blue glasses with a blue lens, and then I look around the room and things that aren't usually blue start to appear blue, and things that were already blue are just a more pronounced blue. And then I can do this with a different color, and every time I will see things that aren't necessarily red, and then things that are red or more pronounced red. And then if we understand this concept, then I can put on impatient or irritable glasses. Then things that aren't usually irritable start to feel irritable, and things that are irritating and things that are already irritating then are really more irritating. And then sad and anxiety and all the things that I'm experiencing in this moment become the lens through which I perceive this experience. Now, this is true for all of us, regardless of the subject of pain. In yoga, it's called samskara. It's the lens or the filter through which we perceive. And they talk a lot about perspective and some of the examples I just gave. So the perspective I have has a huge impact on how I receive the impulse, the stimulus, and how it's going to be processed. Again, we were talking earlier in our conversation today about someone who fears the impact pain will have on their job or their day-to-day, right? And so the stress about something is only going to create more stress in the system. So that being said, the lens through which I perceive will affect everything. What tends to happen with people with pain, a general statement, is that it tends to take their attention fully. People who have, let's say, chronic pain will focus only on the pain. And the two results of this is one, they're seeing everything through painful glasses. And what tends to happen is that they overlook or don't consider all the other things in their life or in their body that aren't in pain, that are actually going well. And so there's a study that they did recently, actually, about elderly people who have one bad knee. And those who believed that the one bad knee would then create two bad knees, well, got two bad knees. And the other subject, the groups thought, well, I have one bad knee, one good knee. Maybe the good knee can enhance the bad knee. And lo and behold, the bad knee repaired and healed itself. And so understanding that the fit players of the team can help the tired players of the team. And just because one player on the team is taking a break doesn't mean the whole team is out of commission, right? I often talk about our systems as different team members. So understanding that has a huge effect on how it's going to unfold. So already just that, which glasses are we wearing today as we're having this conversation is one way to apply it. And then the other way I want to apply this in the meditation that we're going to do is just start to notice different sensations in the body. And again, generally, we tend to notice everything that's uncomfortable or disagreeable. So often, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but most people, when I say, what are you feeling? Oh, this one hurts. And what does the other one feel? Nothing. The other one feels nothing. Does it feel comfortable? Yeah. Does it feel at ease? Yeah. And so we tend to associate, enjoyable sensations as nothing, right? Right. And then on the bigger picture, sitting by the lake is doing nothing because I'm not working. And this would be another conversation for another time. So again, we tend to associate the enjoyable adjectives as nothing. And so what happens is that the only relationship we have with our body is negative. And so we're wearing negative glasses to see our body. And so can we start to develop a spectrum of sensation and adjectives to describe, like you said before, the whole spectrum of sensations between black and white? Can we actually start to refine a vocabulary between tension and pain? They're two different things. Between acute and I won't go into the whole list, but how can we refine not only our perception, our way to connect and define it, describe it to ourselves, so then it's in our personal dictionary. So that's the meditation I want to guide us through.
It makes so much sense. And these glasses and what you were saying in regards to whenever you are irritated and when you put those glasses on, everything around you is even more irritable. And I so agree with that, because sometimes it happens to me as well. Probably it happens to you as well. If you are having a bad day, then everything around you is bad. And then when you're having a good day, oh, everything is perfect. So it's really that perception of what is happening internally with us, how we perceive around us. And one thing that you also said, this how we perceive pain, and that we then look only through pain. I had chronic pain, and it's horrible because sometimes you do suffer so much that it's impossible to see something else than just suffering and that pain in your body, especially if you have pain on a scale from 1 to 10, and 10 being the worst. If it's like 9 and 10, it's really hard to be like, oh, the sun is shining and birds are singing and life is good. So it is challenging, but I love that you're going to be guiding us through this meditation and help us really dissolve this, or see the whole spectrum and where we can find ourselves there. So before you do the meditation, I think it would be best if we do the meditation at the end and I ask you just a couple more questions and then you guide us through. Would that be okay?
Of course, of course.
Yes. So I ask two questions that I ask every single guest. And it's so interesting because every time I get so many different answers. So let me ask you this: from everything that we spoke right now, it might be something completely different, but what would be your number one advice for someone who is healing any kind of physical trauma? What would you say that it's one thing that it would be really good for them to do, to think, to explore, to go beyond?
The first thing that comes, hopefully, is logical enough to apply. It's to listen to that body part and let it guide you to what it needs and how to be a team member in the healing process. So we can be an ally in the healing process versus it's an antagonist or it's an enemy. It's actually there to protect us, and it's doing a function for a reason. And how can we assist the healing process versus antagonize it?
That's beautiful. It's really about communication, right? Our body as our friend, and that injured body part as being a friend and not like an enemy that we have to fight. Because only if we fight, we're going to win. It doesn't work that way, right?
Oh yeah, well, the fact that it's our friend is a fact. I mean, it's been with us our whole life, and it's there through thick and thin. Than any best friend, it takes care of us even when we don't take care of it, right? And so, so the reason I hesitated is because I do a lot of yoga and meditation, and for me, it makes sense to listen to that body part. To someone who might not understand what that means, on a very pragmatic level, is again the sensorial spectrum is one way to enter it. If it makes sense and if it's accessible, is just closing the eyes and bringing the attention to that body part and literally asking a question and seeing what answers come. And might feel like our imagination if we've never tried it before. And the more that we trust that the body is communicating as our ally, and the more that we can respond accordingly, the more then we're in this together. And this feeling of, we're not in this alone, we're in this together. And it goes back to the studies we spoke about earlier.
Yes, thank you for explaining this and in a really practical way. Also for those listeners that perhaps, just talking about, well, ask your body part, what's the answer? It's like, what do you mean? So thank you for explaining this. Now, the last question that I have, you see, it's a really fun question. And that is, if you were stuck on a desert island with an injury, and you could bring only one thing with you that help you heal extremely well from whatever injury you're having, what would that be and why?
My capacity to accept, welcome, and listen.
So something that you already have with you all the time.
Yeah. And just cultivate it despite the challenge.
Yes. And why would that be? Why exactly that what you chose?
The listening, for what I mentioned in the previous question, the accept and welcome is, for different reasons, is one, when I accept, it inherently implies trust, that I trust my body's defense mechanisms. It's built for that. It's built for survival. It has different methods to do that. And I trust that it chose the best one for this reason. So if I accept it, then I'm not antagonizing it, and I'm more learning from it than despising it, for example. And then the acceptation is a nuance of the same reason, is that accepting is gratitude, which opens the heart and has a different biochemical response than lack of gratitude or lack of acceptance. One closes, one opens, and then again the biochemical cascade from there. Knowing that the biochemical cascade of gratitude is the hormonal soup we need to heal, the endorphins and the opioids and all those things. It makes the process, even if it's the same duration of time, a lot more expansive and enjoyable versus adding more suffering to the pain.
Beautiful. Thank you. Now, before we go into the meditation, can you please share those people who would love to contact you or discover more about you and your work? Where can people find that information?
Yeah, with pleasure. I live in Montreal and I often travel for different conferences and events, retreats. I teach privates and training. So the privates are by appointment only, and they're meant to cater to the needs of that person at that moment and explore, whatever might be useful in their life at that moment. The privates I can teach on Zoom. So if some of the listeners don't live in Montreal, I can teach in English and in French and in Spanish. So it's my pleasure to adapt to that. The trainings, again, are in yoga therapeutics. So those are to welcome either yoga teachers who want to better understand how to make their yoga classes as therapeutic as possible, what I mentioned earlier, and or other therapists who want to include some of the yoga philosophy into their tool belt. So it tends to happen in the scientific modalities is, like I said before, the physiotherapist doesn't know the effect on the mind, and the psychotherapist doesn't know the effect on the body. So that's one example. And then in the more holistic approaches, someone who does Reiki or hypnotherapy and all that stuff understands so intuitively, doesn't understand embodied in what happens inside the body while they're doing that. And so it can help to cater to all those people who want to have a more global understanding of health as a whole.
And your website is Resource Yoga, right?
Yoga.com, and if there's a way to include it in the chat or have the listeners find my Facebook page or.
Absolutely, absolutely. So on my website, mynovak.com/podcast, Under your episode, there will be also show links and the link to your website and everything. So yes, it's available and it's going to be very easy to find you. Now, can you guide us now through the meditation?
With pleasure. So I suggest maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Does that feel right?
Perfect. Yes.
So then I'm just going to invite you to find a comfortable seat. You can stay at the right where you are at the computer if you choose to, or you can find a different seat on the ground. You can also choose to lie down. So I'll invite the time it takes to settle into a comfortable position. And before starting officially, just take a tour of the body from head to toe and do any minor adjustments that might make you feel that much more comfortable. And once we feel the body can settle in its place, then we allow the mind to settle into the body and start to feel different sensations in the body. And at first, invite any sensation that comes to your awareness in any order, in any intensity. Whatever comes to your attention, whatever wants your attention, just give it attention. And it's possible that one sensation is slowly evolving if you stay in one spot. It's also possible that the mind is hopping from one spot to another and noticing different sensations throughout the body. And either way, start to notice the different sensations available. Whether it's one sensation slowly changing, the micro movements of sensation, whether you're hopping from one sensation to another and you feel so many different possibilities coexisting at once. It's possible one part of the body feels comfortable, one part of the body feels tense, and it's possible that comfort and tension exist at the same time. Just really become aware that different sensations exist at the same time. It's also possible that the movement of the breath right now is creating sensations as well. With the breath moving in and the breath moving out, the different body parts respond with different sensations. Become aware now of where the breath is moving naturally, and notice if certain parts of the body receive the breath very easily, and if other parts of the body resist to the breath. In other words, does it move more easily in one region than another? And everything you find is perfect. We're just starting to get to know the body without having to change the body. Just know it's present right now. You're doing a little check-in. Now, for the entire time we're practicing together, just double check that the breath for you feels relatively comfortable. Even if some areas are resisting the breath or there's some tension around the breathing area, that's okay. Just allow the natural rhythm of the breath, the depth of the breath, and the technique of the breath to be as comfortable as possible. Doesn't matter how fast or how slow, how deep or how shallow, as long as for you it's comfortable. That's the key as we continue to explore through the body now, and we'll find one area that we'll call either uncomfortable, tense, or painful, more constricted than open. So just travel through the body And if there's more than one area that feels that way, just choose one. So I'll repeat something that's more constricted than open. And that could be discomfort, tension, pain. And just hang out there for a bit. As if you're watching it with a flashlight, an inner light. And you're just curious about it. Openness and curiosity as you investigate this area and you want to get to know it. What's there now? And just notice how that might be different than reacting to it. Tensing around it, fearing it, disliking it. Just notice it as a fact. It is possible that just your presence there, you'll start to notice how the tension or the sensation is changing bit by bit. Possibly yes, possibly no. Just notice. Now leave that place for a moment and again scan through the body and find an area that now feels comfortable, at ease, relaxed, free. Any of those adjectives that relate to comfort more than discomfort. And again, if there's more than one area, then just choose one of them. And do the same thing. You're curious about it. You want to get to know this region in this state. As if you're walking around with an inner flashlight, you could feel, sense, see comfort in the body in this region right now. And again, maybe that sensation is moving slowly, maybe not. You're just really curious about it. You want to get to know it, and you want to especially get to know what comfort feels like. So now we have two areas. One we'll call comfortable and one uncomfortable, or comfort and discomfort. So leave the comfort now, jump to discomfort, that same area you were just in a few moments ago, and watch it now. And just notice you're getting to know it better and better, like visiting a friend more than once. The more you get to visit them, the more you get to know them. It's possible that they change in character. You learn something more about them the second time you meet them. So just see what kind of information, awareness, and connection you can have from this second visit to the same zone. We're in the discomfort zone now. And you might notice a change in quantity and a change in quality. Quantity would mean it went from more tension to less tension, or vice versa. And quality could just be a nuance in the way that you describe this tension. Find new adjectives, and because it's only for you, you might even make up a word that only you understand. How would you describe that? Some people like to make onomatopoeia, like a sound that describes this sensation. And feel free to do that if it feels right for you. And again, you're checking in with your breath regularly. You're double checking the breath is comfortable. And while you're aware of the breath, you're also aware of this discomfort. Now leave the discomfort, come to your breath again. And from your breath, move to comfort. So we make a transition through the breath, come to comfort. That same place you were just in earlier. And same idea, you're visiting this friend again and you get to know it a bit more. New descriptions, new sensations, changes in quantity and in quality. and pass through the breath, move to discomfort. Pass through the breath and move through comfort. Good. One more time. Pass through the breath with your awareness. Land in that discomfort zone. And again, pass through the breath with your awareness and land in the comfort zone. Now, as we bring our awareness to the breath now, can we have a broader perspective, as if we take a step back and we could feel the breath and at the same time feel that discomfort zone? So we feel the discomfort and we feel the breath. At the same time, they coexist. And while we feel that discomfort area and we feel the breath, can we also include the comfort area? So as if we've taken a step back and we have a panoramic view with our flashlight, and our inner sense, our inner awareness helps us to feel and see comfort and discomfort simultaneously, with the breath as the intermediary. The breath is the light of consciousness. It helps us to see better what's happening inside the body. Comfort and discomfort coexist. Now, use your imagination if you have to, and create a passage between the zone of comfort and the zone of discomfort. Create an airway, a channel, a hallway where the movement of energy and the movement of breath can travel easily between the area of comfort and the area of discomfort. And again, use your imagination if you need to. Sometimes I like to imagine osmosis, or like when you put a tint of color in a glass of water and you just see it start to diffuse. And start to see now the discomfort diffuse into this space we've created. So it's not stuck in one spot. It's not stuck in one state. It's moving and breathing and evolving breath by breath. So the place of comfort is moving well-being, spaciousness, breath of life into the area of discomfort. And it's starting to diffuse throughout this hallway, this canal, this pathway for energy, for life force, for fluids. And it's also starting to diffuse, almost like rivers through earth, in any direction and in every direction. The sensation is starting to move easily, to diffuse and dilute itself, so that the body can manage it, address it, and relieve it easily and continuously. Now take another step back with your awareness, have a bigger panorama to feel the rest of the body. Feel both feet, both legs, both hips, the buttocks probably sitting on a chair if you're not lying down. Feel the back, the shoulders, both arms, both hands. Feel the neck, the face, the head, the contour of the head, the contents of the head. Feel the chest, the belly, and feel the whole body together. Feel the whole body together. Feel the whole body together, breathing in this moment. body as a spectrum of sensations, breathing and evolving, breath by breath, resolving, evolving towards more liberating, expansive, balanced, and resilient states, to respond, to welcome, and to move through life as a series of positive opportunity for change. To welcome the change as an opportunity for growth, to refine, and to make a continuously better version of ourselves, breath by breath. Allow the next breath in to move in anywhere and everywhere through the body. Let the whole body receive. And with the exhale, the whole body releases. And if it feels right, whenever it feels right, you can gently open your eyes. And take some time to welcome these inner states, even when the eyes are open.
Thank you, Karina. That was so beautiful. And I really love this communication between comfort and discomfort and building the bridge and, how you describe it. I mean, it's a really interesting and nice practice to dissolve that discomfort and see that it's really a spectrum of everything, right?
Were you able to feel it in your body as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. I'm curious to hear from our listeners. So if any comments want to come my way, I'm always curious to hear their experience too.
Beautiful. Karina, thank you so much for being here for this incredible conversation and for this amazing meditation that I know is going to help so many people. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for providing this to our listeners and may contribute to their well-being.
So this was Karina Reisman on the Mindful Injury Recovery Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, know that there are new episodes released every week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're using to tune in. And I'm also thanking you in advance with a cherry on top for leaving a review. Your review will help us reach even more people who should be hearing these lessons. To access show notes, links, transcript, and video of today's conversation, go to mindnovak.com/podcast and click on episode 14. Until next time, keep evolving, blooming, and healing.